So, Honourable Chairman and distinguished people who are here, I feel very honoured to be here. And as people were saying yesterday, I think it's just reformulating tribal policy is incredibly important, but finding a consensus is also very important. So what I'm going to talk about here is partly that tribal policy cannot be looked at in isolation, because if you look at the natural resources in the areas where they live, and we all know a large part of the country's minerals, water sources, forests, prime land and everything is in those areas. You know, those policies, of course, a lot of money is at stake. So there's a huge amount of, we use the term cost-benefit analysis, but actually there's a very profound kind of balancing act to look at in terms of both the environment and the tribal communities, that the impact of the industrialization, when it comes in a mindless way, is just very, very strong. So, in a way, in all of the talk about tribal policy yesterday, what we've avoided is this key issue. Policy on use of environment and natural resources affects tribal policy implicitly. Huge sums of investment for mining and minerals tend to be considered far more important than tribal communities are, and also more important than preserving the ecosystems that support life on Earth. So that is why the future generations is not just tribal future generations, it's future generations of all of us. Citizens of India, world citizens, we are destroying the planet we live on. You know, this is a truism that we need to understand more and more deeply, really. If you look at just at water, and this is 4 aspects of water, India's groundwater levels have dropped catastrophically since the water mining that became normal with the Green Revolution. If you look at the state of Punjab, the state of diseases, the state of toxics, the depth of water has fallen, it's unbelievable, the real statistics. Of course, hundreds of dams have stopped the natural flow of India's main rivers, and especially the dams are used for the metal industry. Factory pollution has transformed many rivers, making them undrinkable. We're talking about development, we're talking about transformation, but what we've got is actually also a process of de-development. Our rivers are being de-developed. Yes, developed for industrial economic purposes, but as rivers of fresh, clean, oxygen-rich water, we have really damaged them. So we need to understand that kind of dual process. And finally, the impact of mining on water is not taken into account by most people. So when you mine a mountain, the mountain, Adivasis often say, like, for example, the Khans in Orissa said, Hamara devata hai pahar. I mean, they're Hindu, they are not Hindu, you know, they worship Jagannath, Shiva, they consider those deities theirs, but above all they have Niyamgiri and similar deities on the mountains. So what they mean is something actually scientific, it's not just superstitious, that they understand that the water that's coming from the mountains, maybe they don't know about bauxite. So if you know about bauxite, which is the ore for aluminium, it has this capacity for holding water in suspension at the top of mountains. And so it's a source for, especially in North Andhra Pradesh and South Orissa, for many of the area's biggest rivers, they start from there. So when you mine the mountain, as for example we'll see later, Panchpat Mali, Nalco's India's biggest bauxite mine, the mountain is no longer a source of water. The monsoon rain falls, water comes straight off, and it's no longer a source of rivers, and the land around is like a desert. So huge things to take into account just about water usage. And then it involves these profound questions, like in the last weeks of his life, Gandhi tried to have this dialogue with Nehru. Is the Western model of development leading to collective suicide? If India follows this Western model of development, is there any point in independence? Or after independence, he really asked the question, is India really independent at all? Or is the economic policy being controlled by the World Bank, the IMF, and big corporations who are multinationals? This is the abstract I wrote. From Niyamgiri and Polavaram to struggles over dams and oil in the northeast, and over coal and minerals in many areas. Tribal movements against environmentally devastating projects are often seen as anti-development or even anti-national. But on the other hand, many people see them as a vital safeguard for the well-being of India's citizens and the ecosystems that support us all, now and in future. So, 3 questions here. Is it ecological romanticism to view traditional tribal economics as founded on long-term sustainability through restraint in what is taken from nature? I've, in a way, in my most recent book, talked about Adivasi economics as founded on principles of ecology. And so, to me, this is a very important question. And I don't think it's ecological romanticism at all. It's very fashionable among Marxists as well as the mainstream to just dismiss romanticization of tribals. Of course, what the police officer was saying yesterday, romanticization from Maoist, is something else. I don't think any of us should be doing that. Second question, is the whole idea that the Maoist conflict is a class war basically a smokescreen promoted by both sides like an ideological conflict, concealing the classic conflict over resources that is going on in tribal areas, where, as in every resource war, both sides are funded by international investment based on a loot of unrenewable resources. If you look at the Maoists, so many reports have shown they also get their tax or protection money from the mining companies. So what is really going on? And then they call themselves after Mao. Mao's biggest policy was the Great Leap Forward, which was enforced steel production from 1958, which caused the world's worst famine. So you could even say India has a Maoist steel policy. So how are the two sides seem to be on opposite sides because strategically the Maoists always support Adivasi movements against mining, but actually you will never get a real critique of mining from the Maoists. As long as they call themselves after Mao, it's impossible. So a question of priorities haunts tribal policy. Is the revenue from mining projects, and of course the profit for companies, really of greater value than the communities and ecosystems that are being destroyed? This is my last book, so the first chapter, a balancing act between people and profit, and how the root meanings of ecology and economy, that they mean almost the same thing. They mean a balanced use of resources, basically. But of course, economy has come to be much more profit-oriented. And then the second chapter is Adivasi economics. In many ways, indigenous societies based their economy on ecological principles through a system of restraint in what is taken from nature, which you see in the kind of pujas. When they, the first time I went to an Adivasi village, somebody was offering me a crop from his land. And I said, so why don't you take it? It's ripe. He said, nahi, hum puja nahi kiya. And it's the same towards forest products, and that's why they allow a lot of regeneration. I mean, profound systems, that's very, very highly developed systems are being destroyed. That's why when we call them backwards or primitive or something, it's not just cultural racism, it's really a very, very profound mistake in not seeing the ways. Of course we know the ways we are more developed than them, but there are so many more ways they are more developed than us, and we're destroying it, or our economic system is. This is Niyamgiri. A lot of you will know I've done a lot of work there. This is the sacred symbol. It's like yin-yang, the symbol of the mountains and the water. This is a Dongriya temple. This is a shaman. My co-author made this film, and she allowed herself to be photographed as she was coming out of trance. And I like this photo because she's looking directly at us, at the future generations, going into other dimensions. Shamanism is not just superstition, to put it in a few words. It's well established that tribal people live close to nature, in symbiosis with nature, depending on it, with vast knowledge of it, with a religion based on restraint in what's taken from it, a value system of living in harmony with the forest and natural elements. This is 3 things that Adivasi friends, I heard them say. This is Lado Sikaka, one of the Dongriya leaders. People say, Logo ko chanti kete kotia tonka achi amara nengari upre. Agya tonka nahi, amara ma bap achi. Amko rakhya dorkar achi. It's like saying this. People say there's crores of rupees up there. If you read an Oriya textbook, Orissa is the poorest state in India, but it's one of the richest in minerals. All we have to do, mine the minerals, Orissa will be the richest state in India. it's like such a distortion, because the mining industry never works like that. It leaves devastated areas and the profits are never shared. The 2% that is coming to community is top down, and we can talk about that, but CSR in many ways is highly orchestrated and coordinated with the PR industry. This is Bhagwan Maji, one of the leaders in Kashipur, of a movement that has failed because Utkal Aluminium Birla company is now making the mining there. Agya, what do you mean by development? How can it be development to mine millions of years old mountains for profits for a few officials for a few years? And this is Akond in Lanjigar, and many of them say this: we're being flooded out by money. And they also say we cannot eat money. This directly contradicts the Human Development Index way of measuring that, okay, the financial income might have gone up a little bit, but we can't eat money. I mean, they understand, because they, with their hands, they grow their food, and then when that's not there anymore, they know they're dependent on a very, very cruel and ruthless corporate hierarchy. This is bauxite mining for Vedanta that's going on in Chhattisgarh, very, very bad conditions where tribals are destroying their own land for labor. This is one of several red mud lakes in Korba, where Vedanta's factories are. Red mud is never ever supposed to leach into water supplies, and here you can see it's just doing that. And mining happiness was their first slogan. It's quite an appropriate slogan. They are mining happiness, literally. This is in Korba again. You can imagine how drinkable that river is now. Many factories in Korba, and many coal mines like this one. Many people still perceive tribal cultures as backward, underdeveloped, yet Adivasi societies are actually very highly developed, especially in this thing of real sustainability, which is long-term, and in sharing as opposed to competition, including communal or shared as opposed to private property. One of the interesting things about the Niyamgiri Gram Sabhas was they not only refused mining, they refused to have private plots of land. The FRA, as some of my tribal friends say, it's justice at last, but it's also reducing the forest to private plots of land. It's privatizing it. Well, one of the strongest values, as Marx, for example, the word communist comes from communal land ownership. So, tribal societies are primitive communism, or they are real communists, in a way more real than any you would get anywhere else. And competition as a value, I was hearing somebody talking about the education, promotion of competition. In economics, you say competition is good. In politics, competition is good. Why? Actually, Adivasi culture has this strong tradition of democracy, and there is no competitive voting there. It's consensus. Everybody has to agree. In sport, they don't have competitive sports, or they didn't until they're promoted by the mining companies. What they have is dance. And who is a winner, who is a loser in a dance? I mean, if you think of it, dancing is very, very, very exciting. I don't know, I can't see the kind of dancing that happened last night when people are invited and they do on the stage for money. It's not the same thing. Real dance is passionate meeting of communities together, and instead of fighting and competing, they're dancing. This is high development, if you like. So a lot of what is called development has destroyed and is destroying very complex, highly evolved economic and social systems that were sustainable in the true sense of the long-term future. Thinking of hundreds of years ahead. I mean, I think the world's economists are really probably planning that this world will no longer exist in 50 years or so. I've actually seen articles like that, because we see the new motorways and we think, how wonderful. But we're not seeing the cost of it, of where all that material is coming from. The devastated water systems, and above all the wars, because mining, above all, serves the arms industry and the war industry. So this is the book I wrote on the aluminium industry. Producing 1 ton of steel consumes and pollutes over 40 tons of water. So India's rapidly rising steel production is devastating water shortages for farmers. So, at the heart of economic growth is rising steel, exactly like Chairman Mao did. But the devastation of the communities, the devastation of India's future environmental well-being is being destroyed. 40 tons of water for 1 ton of steel, over 1,000 tons of water to produce 1 ton of aluminium. So America, Britain, we aren't making aluminium anymore. Why? Because it's much cheaper and better to get other countries to devastate their communities and ecosystems. And it's like what they call, it's a kind of colonialism, enclave colonialism, where that's how the aluminium industry has developed. There's an amazing book written by a top American aluminium expert saying, America, the United States, can no longer afford to pollute our environment, and because the subsidy, if you understand the economics of aluminium, it's all in terms of subsidized prices, and the profits are being made by the foreign companies. From bauxite mines, a conveyor belt takes bauxite to an aluminium refinery, where trains or lorries take it to an aluminium smelter. These factories depend on electricity and water from dams, coal-fired power stations, supplied by captive coal mines, and so on. So what was a forest with tribal villages that have been there since history began becomes a polluted wasteland. And this is the diagram. If you see the bauxite mine, the refinery, then the smelter, and then the big dams and the power stations and the coal mines. So you have to understand the steel or aluminium industry. I mean, every student, really, whether you're a student of history, economics, sociology, you should start by understanding the industrialization process, really. And because some of my ancestors in Britain were some of the leaders of that industrialization process, I feel in me a kind of coming back in time, like really understanding the impact of this at a personal, at a historical, at an economic level. If you look at Nalco's bauxite, which is India's biggest mine, the tribal villages below it are in devastating poverty, and the land around it is like a desert. It's what was rich forest has become, what we're calling development is often creating wastelands. This is a book by Richard Heinberg, The End of Growth, Adapting to Our New Economic Reality. The economic crisis that began in 2007 was both foreseeable and inevitable, and it marks a permanent fundamental break from past decades, a period when most economists adopted the unrealistic view that perpetual growth is necessary and possible. So is economic growth actually desirable? Considering its costs, many of the heterodox economists say very strongly no. Marxists, like the mainstream, they will say, yes, of course, economy is the base of development and whatever. So what we're considering normal depends on a vast consumption of resources. Above all, the mainstream model of development being imposed in tribal areas is oriented to war. And if you look at the Maoist conflicts, the sandwich theory, I mean, the sandwich reality, obviously, Adivasis, if you speak to them in Buster, they're squeezed from both sides, that both the Maoists and the police will punish them for collaborating with the other. So among the worst resource conflicts are obviously Raugat in Chhattisgarh, Kandahar and other in Orissa, Saranda in Jharkhand. That's just some of the biggest forests that are being converted in iron ore mines. So in many ways, as I said in the beginning, the Maoist conflict is really a resource war. Both sides mask that fact. Certainly much of the recent expansion in deployment of armed police is funded through foreign investment. Mao caused the world's worst famine by the Great Leap in 1958. We can never get a frank critique of the mining industry. We will never get it from people who call themselves after Mao. This is a book about that resource war in Jharkhand. So then this is where, I don't want to take much more time, maybe another 5 minutes, is that okay? Obviously, electricity is one of the biggest things. How much does India need? And this is such a, there is no answer to that question, because we followed a model of development where how many lights are on in a city like Hyderabad during night? How many million lights? And here we're not using natural light, we're using these lights. It's such an overconsumption of resources has become normal for us. And then the energy coming from, especially coal, also hydropower, which are the most displacing for tribals, and nuclear power. How many people know this waterfall, or have been there, or know where it is? Can anybody put up a hand? It's Kandahar in North Orissa, and it's the range of mountains there. It's Orissa's tallest waterfall. It's personally the most amazing place I know in the world, and it's sacred to the Pauri Bhuya tribe from there. This is the bottom, it falls into this amazing pool. And this is the top of it, and already the mining there When POSCO was planning its steel plant, I don't know how many of you remember, there was a big furor in the papers. POSCO didn't want to make a steel plant in Orissa. They wanted the manganese and the iron ore. They are already getting it. The whole thing of the POSCO steel factory was a kind of sham, but what's really being exported already, the Coromandel mines, controlled by quite powerful political interests, it wasn't even touched by the Shah Commission. It's one of the most corrupt and biggest iron ore mines in Orissa. And already the waterfall is getting less. The villages around there, the water has dried up. These are dependent on water deliveries in such a water-rich area. So, CBA, how can we do a genuine cost-benefit analysis when economists, they discount what cannot be measured? And as we all know who deal with tribal things, you cannot measure happiness, you cannot measure quality of life, you can measure water flow, but you know, it's so distorted the way it's measured. This is the Vedanta factory when they began to make it, with Nyamgiri behind. And the Dongria herding their cattle on the top. Amazing trees going up the mountain. The Dongria you will know by now. And this is what is being produced, the nice shiny aluminium that we all depend on in so many uses now, but the biggest use is for the arms industry. So, study the aluminium industry worldwide has shown it's orchestrated by a cartel, which means an informal, non-legal monopoly that controls prices. It's run by the world's most powerful financial institutions, with sections of governments and armed companies that promote war and conflict as a business. So, you know, this is what's happening in Syria, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan is very, very relevant because a lot of the metals are being exported for that. This cartel ensures that promises of prosperity in mining and aluminium producing regions can never be realized due to the so-called externalities, externalizing the real cost of production onto local areas through keeping the prices for bauxite, labor, electricity, water, transport very low and immersing governments into unrepairable debt. I saw the World Bank deal with the government of Orissa for the year 2000, and it's unbelievable, the amount of debt. The policy of Orissa is completely controlled by the World Bank, IMF. In fact, all the state governments, in fact, the central government, it's no major policy decision is taken without approval of the IMF because they are controlling the investment in all these different ways. So India's aluminium, like its steel production, is rising rapidly, but what are the costs for rural communities and ecosystems? I'm not going to dwell on this, but if you look at the rapid rises in world finance for mining, it's unbelievable. If you look at the below thing, just the latest analysis of the aluminium refinery costs, that book you can buy for $19,000. I don't think it'll be in the library here. It's okay. So just coming, speculation, how it's hedge funds, amazing. The real BlackRock is the world's largest asset management fund. It's the largest investment in all the world's mining companies. It's controlling the world economy. So when the Prime Minister went to America on his first visit in 2014, certainly Larry Fink was the most important person he met there. But Larry Fink also controls drone technology and many other things. So, coming to the end now, anybody know what mountain this is? This is Gandhamardan, and they built a whole city for people to work there, but then a movement managed to stop the bauxite mining in 1986. And that city is still there, the trees have grown quite nicely, but nobody ever lived there. And it's a wonderful waterfall. These are some of the activists from Kashipur who came there. And this is Karlapat, where Vedanta wants to mine. This is what it looked like around Panchmat Mali before. The fertility around these big mountains is or was unbelievable. And now you've seen in the other pictures what happens to it when it's mined. This is a traditional Kond village, very remote, below Karlapat. Very beautiful. And then these are the wastelands where... So the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth was brought by many Adivasis from the world. It's like, we the people of the nations of Earth, considering we're all part of Mother Earth, as an indivisible living community, hereby declare inalienable rights of Mother Earth. It was made in an editorial in EPW, but most people don't know about this. It's more important in a way than the rights of indigenous peoples, and how indigenous peoples stand up for the rights of Mother Earth and nature. So this is in the heart of Niyamgiri again. So thank you very much.